Okay, here's the third installment of the video lecture series on gender. This was the last slide that you saw. We were talking about these gender-specific and stereotypical images of what it means to be a girl, what it means to be a boy. You can see, again, same children's book from the 70s. Boys can eat, but girls can cook. Boys invent things, and girls use what the boys invent. So we're really kind of we're sort of trivializing the role of women in society with these images. Now, what happens when gender roles change or evolve? And we've seen this a lot within our country, within our culture, especially within the last 10, 15 years. We see fathers and husbands taking more of an active role in preparing meals, in cooking, child care, etc. So what happens as these gender roles start to change or evolve? That's something that we can think about. We see that more men are nurses. Now, I'm from your all's neck of the woods. I'm from Lincoln County, as is my brother. And I remember, and we're in our 30s and 40s, we're older than you guys, but I remember my brother, being from Lincoln County, decided he was going to be a nurse. And he took a lot of crap from his male friends for wanting to be a nurse. Won't you put on a dress? You know, yeah, they were making fun of him, basically calling him a girl. He said, that's okay, just wait till I get through school and then we'll see who has the last laugh. And sure enough, he got through school. He is a nurse anesthetist. He's making a lot of money. So all those guys that were making fun of him for wanting to be a nurse, he's laughing all the way to the bank for sure. But we're starting to see sort of a reversal of trend. We're starting to see some changes. We see male hairdressers. We're seeing females who are doctors. We're seeing females who are construction workers. So we're starting to see some change in reverse. And what happens during this process, especially initially when men are doing quote-unquote women's work and women are doing quote-unquote men's work within society? Well, there's some teasing, there's some blaming, there's some making fun of, there's some what's wrong with you kind of thinking. Well, and of course we make the assumption that someone is gay because they happen to be a woman who happens to want to be a construction worker. Male hairdresser. When I say that in class, the first thing people say is gay. Well, you don't know that for sure. Now, are some male hairdressers gay? Sure. Are some female construction workers gay? Sure, probably. But are they all? No. I can tell you that because I know. But we make those kinds of assumptions. So, are there any truth, or is there any truth to gender stereotypes? Is there a little grain of truth anywhere in these stereotypes that we put out there? Maybe, probably. As infants, boys are more active than girls. We know this. Now, is this biological or is this taught? Can you teach an infant or model to an infant who is a boy to be more aggressive, or model to an infant who is a girl to be more passive? Not overtly. So maybe there is some biological trace there. We know that girls tend to be healthier than boys. Female embryos are more likely than males to survive prenatal development. Infant boys are more prone to disease and dysfunction. Adolescent boys and young men are more likely to engage in unhealthy risk-taking behaviors. A lot of that, again, the last point about risk-taking behaviors is due to environment. Boys are taught and socialized to take risks, and girls are socialized and taught not to do that so much. In classrooms, boys are more likely than girls to have a hard time sitting still. On a playground, boys more often play vigorously, aggressively, and girls often play quietly. They're more demure. So again, is that taught? Think about your experiences on the playgrounds of your school. Has that changed? Maybe it has. I asked that question in some high schools, and the girls will say, well, we played basketball and baseball and dodgeball, which is right along with the boys. So maybe this is starting to evolve and to change. Intellect. Yep, females have us again. Females tend to have a greater verbal ability than males. Girls read, write, and spell better than we do, guys. Sorry, it's kind of research-based. I'm not making that up. Wish I was. More boys have reading and other language-related problems and learning disabilities, such as stuttering. Something else that we know to be true based on research, males tend to have greater spatial ability than females. So guys, we tend to be better at, like, throwing a ball through a hole or through a hoop, or, hitting a ball, or, those kinds of tasks. From childhood on, boys tend to have better mental rotation skill than girls.
From adolescence on, boys are more accurate than girls on spatial tasks that involve relations between objects in space. So now, am I saying that girls are not athletic? No, that is not what I'm saying. I have coached girls' sports. I know girls can be very athletic, sometimes more so than boys. But generally speaking, males tend to have these greater spatial abilities than females, which lends itself to athletic performance and things like that. So, now, back to the idea of gender socialization. The process where a person learns the behaviors and the attitudes that are expected of his or her gender. Every culture does this differently. We're going to talk about that. Within our culture, I'm going to talk about how specifically boys and girls are socialized to be men and women. How this process is very different in other parts of the world. And again, keeping in mind that sex is biological. We're not talking about sex, we're talking about gender, which is cultural. Now, let me go to the very famous anthropologist Margaret Mead. Back, in the early 1900s, there was this idea that men were strong, they were independent, they were fierce, they were take charge, and women were weak and nurturing and, communicating and networking, and this was biologically based. The thinking was men are born this way, women are born that way. There's nothing you can do about it, it's just the way it is. Well, Margaret Mead came along in 1935, and she's like, wait a minute, maybe not so fast. She put forth the argument that gender was socially constructed, and she set about on a very famous, maybe one of the most famous studies in all of social science. She studied 3 different tribes in New Guinea, and what she found has had ripple effects, still continues to ripple across our understanding of what gender is or is not. She was saying, all right, gender is this idea, this thing that we just kind of create. She looked at the Arapesh tribe, and what she found in this tribe was that both men and women, now we're talking about a different part of the world, not the United States here, that both men and women possessed stereotypically feminine characteristics by our standards in this country. So in other words, the men would wear makeup, they would care for children, they looked and acted and presented as very feminine. But there was not this idea that they were somehow wimps or wussy or gay or whatever. That was just kind of the way it was. If you woke up within our culture today, and there were norms and rules set in place that guys wore dresses. If that's all you knew, would you be wearing a dress to school today? Or out to a party tonight? Probably. If you didn't know any differently, you wouldn't think that it was strange. That's the point we're getting at. The Mandugamore tribe, she found that both sexes possessed stereotypically masculine characteristics. So the women in this tribe were aggressive, were warlike, would hunt, were very, very aggressive. And then the Chibali tribe, the last of the 3, she saw and found that the gender roles were reversed. The men were more feminine by our standards, and the women were more masculine by our standards. So she presents this to us and says, look, in these 3 parts of New Guinea, these 3 different groups of people, they've come up with their own idea of what gender is, and that's their reality. So it's not biologically based, it's constructed. We come up with it as people, as human beings together. So what influences how children learn gender roles? Well, parents. For better or for worse, parents tend to be our primary reference group when we're very young. From birth, fathers tend to interact more with their sons than daughters, while moms tend to interact more with their daughters than their sons. Mothers play traditional games like peekaboo, and fathers play more physical, rough-and-tumble activities with their children. For example, a dad might urge his frightened son to jump off a diving board. Be a man, just do it. But not be so insistent with his daughter. He might say, well, that's okay, honey, just take your time, it's all right. So we start socializing into these gender roles, our children as parents. Peers, by the age of 3, most children's play will show the impact of gender stereotypes. There's a ton of research that's been done on gender stereotypes and how children's play and their activities together sort of help to form and forge these ideas about what it means to be men and women. Boys prefer blocks and trucks. Girls prefer tea sets and dolls. Young children are even critical of their friends or their peers who engage in cross-gender play. That's boys playing with girls, girls playing with boys. And back to this idea for a second with parents. If you don't believe that gender is socialized, I always ask this question in class, and you can think about this as men and women think about the question I'm asking you. And find pictures if you don't know the answer. What color was your nursery when you were a baby? If you're a boy listening to this, watching this lecture, I'll bet you chances are that your nursery was probably a strong primary color, or colors like blue or green, and probably had masculine themes like trucks and sports and things of that sort. Ladies, those of you who are watching this PowerPoint and listening to this, I will bet you chances are good that your nurseries were pink or yellow or something soft and pastel, maybe decorated in very feminine themes like Barbie dolls or princesses or horses or something like that. That would be my guess. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule, but this is how we start the socializing process. Gentlemen and ladies, would you let your young child, your son, who is maybe 2 or 3 years old, play with girls' toys? Would you let him play dress up and dress up in women's clothing, like maybe your wife's clothes? Or let them experiment with makeup? Now, at that young of an age, they don't know that what they're doing is gender inappropriate. They have to be taught this. Most of you would answer no to that. So, between the ages of 2 and 3, children begin to prefer playing with their same-sex peers. Sorry, I didn't mean to make that small, so we'll go back to the big. Children resist parents' efforts to get them to play with members of the opposite sex at this young of an age. Television. Women on TV tend to be cast still in romantic, marital, or family roles, traditional gender stereotypical roles that reflect our society. They're depicted as being emotional, passive, and weak. Think about the sitcoms that you watch. And do this. Just think about the television shows that are out there. What kind of roles are these women cast in? They're still pretty traditional. Men on television tend to be cast in leadership or professional roles. They're depicted as being rational, active, and strong, take charge, breadwinners, if you will. Children who watch a lot of TV end up with more stereotypical views of men and women. So what we're saying is that children who spend a lot of time watching TV tend to think of the world that we live in terms of gender stereotypes. They tend to think that women are and should be the way that society defines them, and the same for men. So they fall into that. The less TV that children watch, the less they feel, and the less they get wrapped up in the stereotypical ideas of gender. We're going to call that the end of this part of the video lecture. Thank you.